So in my last video, I went into miracles, healing, like I think I briefly mentioned exorcisms, but yeah, mostly miracles in the Bible, but also outside it, and a lot of the evidence put forth for them. This one I actually wanted to focus exclusively on demons, actually. And, this is something that I don't think is often talked a lot about. Um, don't get me wrong, it's talked a lot. Well, I mean, in comparison to miracles, it's not talked a lot, in my view. You can find plenty of material on it, of course. And obviously, I'm talking about it. But yeah, in comparison to like miracles, healing, stuff like that, it's just not talked or used or debated, even discussed much. And I think that's for multiple reasons. One of them is that there's just not much knowledge, or yeah, I would say knowledge, but from a non-Christian perspective, there's also just not much material either to use to talk a lot about it compared to the other, more debated Christian topics by both Christians and non-Christians. But this one, I really wanted to dive. This last month, I've been for some reason just more enamored with studying demonology and stuff like that. And the thing is, like, if you're a Christian, you have to believe in them because Jesus clearly did. Even if you're a non-Christian, we Muslims believe in, what are they called? I used to know them. One of my Muslim friends told me the word. I forgot what they're called. I know if you've watched the Dune movies, Dune, those messianic type religions in Dune are kind of mostly, are really, you can tell, inspired a lot by Islam. And I think they use a similar word for evil spirits on Dune too. But I can't remember now, but yeah, it's similar to that. But here's the thing. Most Christians, I'm on Genesis 6 right now for a reason. Most Christians, I think the Catholic Church officially, but even besides Catholics, a lot of just Christians in general, believe that angels or demons are fallen angels. And even I did for the most part. And honestly, I'm still hesitant to deny that. So this is more me just questioning this long idea among the church, but most of the churches. But let's start with this first verse, Genesis 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them. Now, this is right after, I need to give context, this is right after the fall, right after Adam and Eve, or the narration of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So, this is when, this is after Cain and Abel, so this is like those first stories, and basically it's like describing, all right, this is now when humanity is, starting to really populate the earth. So when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And then it just goes real quickly into Noah and the flood, basically. This is clearly one of the primary reasons Genesis gives for the flood, though. And the Nephilim now has a concept that's been, again, very obscure, debated for a long time. The thing is, it's another word that is used for giants today. You can even see this in the footnotes. That was footnote 2. And yeah, or giants. That's also how it can translate to, and I think is where we get our word for giants, is a word that sounds a lot like Nephilim. And they're mentioned just a couple other times later on in the Bible. But yeah, so it's clearly related somehow to giants, but also to the offspring of women and human women and sons of God. What are sons of God? That's the thing. Again, the Old Testament especially is much more vague, or I don't want to say vague, cryptic. It's some of the language it chooses. Now let's skip on to Job. We're going real far now. So the famous book of Job, you know, most people know the story, even non-Christians, about the righteous man Job who gets tempted by Satan to deny God and deny his faith. But I was always, I mean, I love the story, but I was always fascinated about how it's set up for us. Now there was a day when the sons of God, that phrase again, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and uprighteous man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does God fear Job for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house?" And all, this is their debate, basically. I don't want to quote all this, because the most important thing was those first passages I quoted. Now, from here, we can easily distinguish that the sons of God are not human beings. That's one interpretation, but it's like, the sons of God it's only used a few other times in the Bible. I think it's also used in Ezekiel and Isaiah. And in those descriptions, it's clearly also about heavenly beings of some sense. It's talking about heaven. So we know that the sons of God is not human beings. So what else could it be? Well, obviously the common interpretation is angels. And that one I do think is correct. Because in every single instance of the sons of God, and in that case, it's Satan or the accuser is the real passage. But it's important for the New Testament connections. Now, if you're a non-Christian, I just have to tell you, like, I'm presenting, I mean, this is also for you too, I'd say, because it's more of describing Christianity too. But the important thing is, like, I know you might want to dispute, just isolate passages and say, well, how can we say this is like tied to this one? So like in my view, that's a debate for another time. Right now, I'm just trying to, because I'm also talking a lot to even Christians too. It's like, let's just look at demonology, and obviously, like, every book in that sense for Christians is connected. So we need to go to the New Testament too. And New Testament talks a lot more about, the spiritual things than the Old Testament does. People tend to think the Old Testament writers had no concept of it and there was no afterlife even or sense of that at all. That's not true at all. Like, it's much more brief, it's true, especially for how much longer the Old Testament is. But there are very clear, like, that is a very clear, like, that's basically kind of like a heavenly courtroom, is kind of what the idea you get from that. Like, it says the sons of God came to present themselves, and then they have this debate, an argument that involves Job for something they're disputing, and that winds up being used as the pretext for what happens to Job. So now I want to turn all the way to 2 Peter. We're going far back now. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. Now the word for hell here, where is it? I said Tartarus. That's the actual word used in the Greek, is Tartarus, not hell. That's what we translate it to, but it's actually Tartarus. So 2 Peter, as I believe the writer is Peter. So Peter, or if you're non-Christian, the writer of 2 Peter. I would still say you should believe it's Peter, but that's, again, a debate for another time again. Peter, I'm going to say Peter because that's what I believe. Peter is saying that God locked up the angels after they sinned in Tartarus. And this was right before he then mentions Noah and the flood. And just for context's sake, so we need to read this in context. If he did not spare the ancient world, so after he says that he locked the angels that sinned up in Tartarus, committing them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making the example, goes on and on, the righteousness of Lot. Yeah. But basically, it's like, when you read that, it's going in chronological order, too. Because Sodom and Gomorrah So he's talking about the angels sinning. And if you read Genesis 6, he's clearly implying that the sons of God, again, are angels. When the sons of God came into the lions, and then that's when the Lord regrets what he does. That's when the flood happens. As for Sodom and Gomorrah, that came after that. If I can find it here. I mean, I know it did, because that's literally, Genesis 6 is literally right after the, paradise falls. So there's no way it even could be. I mean, I could just go back before those and just confirm that Sodom and Gomorrah, again, does not appear before then. Noah's descendants. Oh, here it is, Abraham and Lot. So there's Lot. Tower of Babel. So Tower of Babel was before. Where is it? I know it's somewhere. I guess the chapters don't mention Sodom and Gomorrah, but yeah. Abram rescues Lot. There it is, king of Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah. So yeah, that was long after the flood. But the point is, 2 Peter, he's going through Genesis basically there and giving a list of what happened in chronological order. Now, it's important now to talk about another book called First Enoch. First Enoch. Enoch is a character in the Bible. He's a character in Genesis 2. It's the 7th generation of Adam. So he is mentioned in the Bible, and I think, I'm not going to go back and find it, but I want to say I think the Bible also describes him as a prophetic person. So someone that you would expect to have like visions and revelations too, just like in John. We're going to go to Revelations 2 for this as well. But First Enoch describes, it's much more detailed on the description of the origins of demons, basically. And this is where the rubber meets the word. The rubber meets the road, well, whatever you say. First Enoch claims explicitly that demons are basically the spiritual descendants, or just the spiritual beings from the Nephilim. That the Nephilim, that the sons of God, yes, it says those are angels too. There's really no dispute in the ancient world, and I would say mostly in our time as well. And I think from here on out, I'm just going to say, yeah, the sons of God in Genesis 6, we're going to establish now those were definitely angels. So Genesis 6 was saying angels, had sex with women and then produced offspring. And that we're going to go with were the Nephilim. Now, there's two possible interpretations. Do I want to go into this too? But yeah, there's two possible interpretations of Genesis 6. If we read it again, I've heard a scholar, an Old Testament scholar that I read, he argues another interpretation when you read this passage. When you read this, he actually argues it's not saying the Nephilim were those offspring from the demons and women. Instead, the writer is just simply saying that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, that was just a time period for that, and that the sons of God and that the offspring from the angels and women were not, that the writer's not saying those were the Nephilim. And if you read the passage, it's possible. That is a very possible interpretation. I'm not going to say I'm for certain it's wrong. The problem I have with that is, that writer, I remember, the Old Testament scholar, he mostly just focused on the phraseology of the sentences themselves as justification for his interpretation. But as usual, even though that's an important point of evidence for, the grammatical evidence for interpreting things, it's not the only thing. You have to consider the wider context, even like external factors like the ancient world itself. And First Enoch, and when you read pretty much all ancient writers, they disagree with that interpretation. Are we going to say they're all wrong? It's possible. But see, in my view, I tend to always lean more credence to those people because they were, again, closer in time. We're talking about ancient documents. They were closer in time. They likely had better translations or just more populous manuscripts than we do, more ancient copies of the Bible too. So I always say, you can't just simply dismiss that completely. And that's not my only dispute with that interpretation. The other idea is that when you read Genesis 6, I don't know how you can say that. It seems so clearly to me be describing an origin story to the Nephilim. And I remember the same scholar said this too, that when you read it, it's like the writer, he says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. Why is he saying it like that? And that's all he says. Because his audience definitely knows what he's talking about. He doesn't feel a need to describe this for us 2,000 years, or actually in that case, 3,000-4,000 years later. he doesn't feel a need to describe it for us because his main audience in his time, they already had ideas of who the Nephilim were. He's basically setting the record straight, saying, all right, you've heard about these people. You heard about these creatures. This is their true origin. And then he says the men of renown and men of mighty deeds. I tend to think the men of renown, men of mighty deeds, saying that these are the people you've heard about, that he's actually referring to like epics in that time. And we know these writers in that time were aware of other like pagan / polytheistic, Greek, or not really Greek, but Egyptian myths, Hittite myths, all those kinds of mythologies in that time. And a lot of them include obviously gods and goddesses, but also demigods. And I tend to think, now this is more speculation on my part, but still I think it's kind of supported by that, which is he's saying that the stories about demigods, if you know, those are, the sons of humans and gods. So it's a very, very similar concept that he's saying that these people you've heard about, like Gilgamesh, like the people in the epic, the characters in the epic of Gilgamesh, written around that same time too, for his audience. Like he's saying to those, like these demigod-like creatures you've heard about that your neighbors believe in, they were actually the Nephilim, that they actually were real at one point on the earth. And they were the giants, these giant-like creatures born to angels and women and humans. And when you skip to the New Testament times, now we're going to go into like Justin Martyr, who was a 2nd century Christian writer. There's a lot of others in that time. When you read Justin Martyr, he explicitly says that demons were the offspring that the demons are the Nephilim spirits on the earth. That they used to live on the earth in bodily form. The flood mostly destroyed them. They continued for a little time after that, as it says in Genesis, but eventually died off. And that now they only exist on the earth as evil spirits. They're evil spirits roaming around on the earth. And this is why I want to skip to now Luke, because when you read the Gospels, you get Jesus never explicitly distinguishes demons from angels. That is true. So why, again, I'm not completely sold on giving up that idea. But, let me just read this passage. This is Jesus saying, when an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest and finding none. It says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes to find the house, it finds the house swept in order. Then it goes and brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last day of that person is worse than the first. Obviously, there's a passage about both demons and also I'd say generally about, you could also say generally about, God, you always got to be careful that, as support groups will always say, it's like, you're never, the ditch is always right next to you as you're, trying to climb out of, addictions and stuff like that as well. And it's like, you conquer one demon, but then it's like, got to be careful because you sweep your house, but then 7 more can, then the fight is never over. You're never out of the fight, basically. And then they just come and attack you even more and even harder, and then you're worse off before when you give into it again. I mean, obviously, I say that's an important message from that verse. Don't want to, diminish that meaning as well to it. But you have to also understand, like, this is Jesus also giving, like, his own knowledge about demons and what they're doing sometimes, too. It's like he casts them out, right? He exorcises demons. What happens to them? He's like saying this is where they go. They dwell on the earth. You actually see that when you go to Job and you read Satan again, he said, what he says is like, I go to around the earth, walking up and down on it. Now you might say, well, that means they're evidence that they're demons, that they're angels. Now, it's possible, but again, even if demons are not angels, as I think I'm arguing here, they're obviously, and that's what you get clear in the Bible, they're still servants of Satan, and they're in the same league as him, is the whole purpose of it. And and obviously they're offspring of them, so they're similar creatures too. Just not actual literal angels is what we're getting to now. So, you would see similar language used for them too, and it kind of describes them. So again, they come and they go waterless places seeking rest. Now, I've heard this before, and I'm starting to lend more credence to it. Then we have to ask, why do demons then, want to possess people, possess bodies? You go to Legion. That was something else I want to get to. The story of Legion. Where was that? I think that was Luke 9. It's in the other Gospels too. Who is, the story of where he sends the demon into the pigs and then they, fall off the cliff. I don't think I can find it right now. Or am I staring right at it? Yeah, here it is. And the demons are saying, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me, for he had commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man. Many a time had seized him, shackles. Jesus said, what is your name? Said Legion, for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs were feeding. They said, please let us, and he gave them permission, and they stampede off the cliff. I tend to think that the reason demons want to possess and inhabit people, when you read these scriptures now and you combine all this together, is like, well, they used to have bodies is the thing. They used to actually be, and if you consider it, they're evil, they're wanting to sin a lot, is the whole point of the Bible's depiction of them. And, before the flood, the whole point was that it was one of the most evil places on earth then. So you could say from their evil perspective that they got to be more evil. Or they got to have more of the time of their life when they were, the giants on the earth. And now they're just spirits wandering the earth, trying to get that back, essentially. Because we like the things like, especially I would say like, this is something that I think non-Christians would also bring up on the issue with demons. It's like, well, that doesn't even make sense. Why would demons want to do this? If they exist, why would they want to do stuff like this? Well, in my view, it makes more sense if you don't believe they're fallen angels, but actually a totally different creature that were offspring from them. And then they used to live on the earth in like their idea of glory, their sinful glory on the earth before the flood. But they don't anymore. And so now they're just roaming the earth, basically. And that's an interesting passage. He says, do not send us into the abyss. Because if we go to 2 Peter again, he says, condemn them, cast them into hell, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment. Where does it say that? I think it says, I want to say it's the same. Oh, wait, no, it's not 2 Peter. But that's another important passage to get back to, because what you read there is 2 Peter seems to be implying the fallen angels, the evil angels that join Satan, that they're not on the earth, though. They're bound in chains right now. It's a similar depiction of like what Zeus did with the Titans in Greek mythology. That they're actually, and similar to that story, we now go to Revelation, where then it says they will be released too for a time, but they're not released yet. So yeah, now we're all the way in Revelation. Did I skip it? No. This Revelation. Maybe I did. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fight back, but after he was defeated, there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. But that wasn't the only passage I wanted to bring up. Where's the 1,000-year reign? I'm telling you, I was just on it. I must have... The 7 bowl. Oh, yeah, I was closer to the end. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are the... Yeah. This is where I meant. Then I saw the angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. Again, that similar chain language used. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. It's just, obviously, there's so much Revelation. No one knows the entire meaning of Revelation. But still, I mean, as usual, we can get glimpses, important glimpses, though. But see there, Greek, the abyss, that's the same word used. So the bottomless pit, the abyss, it's that same word that Jesus used, that the demons used, Jesus fearing that he's going to send them there too. That Jesus is about to send them to Tartarus, or the bottomless pit, to be chained up, until judgment. And here's something else about that. There's one last thing, Matthew. I know I'm skipping around so much, I kind of just wanted to have... Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and he gave me no food." That's describing the judgment. That's Jesus talking about the judgment. Now, what do we glean from this? Again, Jesus never directly distinguishes demons from angels, but I would say you really get that impression, because distinguishing language is used all the time to describe them. And there's not one single passage that unites them throughout the entire New Testament. There's not a single passage you can point to where it directly says the demons are fallen angels. We just have long held that idea, and that was a tradition developed later in the church. But again, if you go to Justin Martyr, like the early 2nd century church, and even the 1st century writers we can find, and 1st Enoch. I bring up 1st Enoch because that was an ancient, even if you don't believe Enoch wrote it, and I don't think I do either, I'm still not sure it's scriptural. There's debate over that too. There's certain segments of Christians that actually do consider it canonical with the other books. I'm not one of those, but I would say it's still, just like the Apocrypha, it's still an important book that can still give wisdom. And it's even quoted by various biblical writers too, like Jude. So we know, even from the biblical perspective, that it has some value in that sense. I just would say it doesn't have the same value or the same authority as the actual books in the Bible. But yeah, it's definitely an important book to read, and must have some truth to it if you believe the Bible, as I do as a Christian, because it quotes from it. And, all these passages, they make it very clear, all these writers, 1st Enoch, if you read Josephus, we talked about him in the last video about miracles. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, he doesn't directly, again, say demons aren't angels, but again, he doesn't say they are. Instead, when you see his one little passage about it, he says that he's speaking to his Roman audience, and he just describes them as spirits of the wicked. The spirits of the wicked, which still sounds much more different than saying, they're fallen angels, of course. He could still, I think his Greek audience had an idea of angels in his theology, so he still could have probably said some similar word to that. But instead, he just calls them demons of the wicked. And yeah, you read Jesus, all he ever says is he calls them unclean/evil spirits. He always uses those words whenever it's clearly talking about demons and possession and exorcism. But anytime angels are always distinguished. And some might come at me with, well, of course they are, because they're fallen, and the fallen angels became demons. That's what they are. It's like, no, that's not what did you not just read Matthew? He's saying these are evil angels. So the evil angels that are on Satan's side are still given that same language, still given the angel language. They are never described as demons. Demons are always, seemingly in language at least, separated from them. They have their own identity in the Bible. And yeah, when you combine all that with 1st Enoch, with the knowledge of ancient Jews and Christians who were much more closer to that time, Justin Martyr, for instance, he lived so close to that time, he very likely was in connection to disciples, maybe not the apostles, any of the apostles directly, but certainly students of the apostles. Like, he was part of that tradition, is my point. And so were a lot of the other ancient church writers. And all of them Clement of Alexandria, I believe, Origen even in the 3rd century, Irenaeus in the 2nd century, Athenagoras in the 2nd century, all of them believed that demons were the Nephilim, that there are evil spirits from the Nephilim, from the offspring of angels and women that are now roaming the earth. And now if you were to go to even like near-death experiences, as I've studied some of those too, what I always find interesting, there's less near-death experiences that talk about hell, demons, and all that stuff. But the few that do, even though I don't necessarily believe, some of these people might just be lying, making it up for money. There's always that possibility. But still, if you take, again, I just like to take it all into consideration, not just any single person's story about what they claim they saw. If you take all the stories together, from what I've heard, from so many I've heard, they always have a common theme of when they claim to experience demons, they never use fallen. They're always described as like creatures, like demonic, like just evil-looking creatures roaming that are waiting for them or something when they, die, and then they see them, on the earth in their spiritual form on the earth. That's always how they're interpreted in these near-death experiences that involve like hell, Satan, all that stuff. They're always like more like creatures serving them rather than actual angels. So, I would say that's lesser evidence than just going straight with the scriptures from a Christian perspective and then going towards all the other non-biblical evidence we have. But yeah, you take it all into consideration. I used to believe demons were fallen angels too, but I'm very much believing now that, yeah, they were the Nephilim. That's actually what they were. They're these evil spirits roaming the earth. And you might say, well, how do you explain, Catholic, maybe like exorcists who are still, saying they're exorcising demons? I've heard a lot of those stories, and I have to say, I'm not entirely against them either. I am a Christian. I do believe demons exist. I do believe in exorcisms. Jesus did. The apostles did. And when you read Justin Martyr, even in the 2nd century, after the biblical times have ended, the New Testament times have ended, he's still talking about exorcisms being performed in his time too. So I absolutely believe they could still exist and still be performed in the Catholic Church, which is right on many other things I agree with them on, could still be performing those too. And yet they don't believe, I would say, the completely correct idea of their origin or who they really are. Well, again, this gets back to, I think, in one of my other videos where I talked about, one of the best things about, about believing in Christ and Christianity is that you have God's grace to save you in the end. That comes with just having incorrect beliefs too. Now, I'm not going to go the full New Age route today or relativist route. I don't believe that at all. That's not, in my view, supported in the Bible at all. So, no. If you read Jesus too, doctrine, the idea of doctrine and dogma, it still matters. It still does matter. But, the huge but is that it always gets back to the core things. It's always just the age-old question. Jesus said, who do you say I am? That will determine, whether you're saved or not, because at the end of the day, everyone actually is condemned. Everyone is guilty and sinful of the law. If they actually search their heart and know who they really are, we all have that in us. And just like spiritual law and human law, no good deed is gonna make up for your evil too. You still have to be punished for it. But Jesus offers a way. But you have to believe it. You have to actually believe in Jesus and accept Jesus. That's set in stone for me. But again, all these different minor disagreements. I was raised Church of Christ. I remember Baptists. I remember having debates with Baptists all the time over. And when I was a kid and I became a Christian when I was 13. Yeah, I just remember so many pointless. I still probably have a lot of pointless debates, of course, but even more back then, debating Baptist Christians, with my Church of Christ bros all the time over just this such a minor thing about you must be baptized, period. And the thing is, Baptists don't say you shouldn't be baptized. It's just, there was some debate over, I remember Acts 2:38 when Peter says, believe in Jesus, but also be baptized. So it's you must be baptized. I just remember that being just a huge thing. It's just it's a huge thing over nothing. And the same with this. This is more, I'm doing this because it's still important to come to the truth, even these small things. Also, I'm just fascinated by it too. I mean, that's the main thing. I'm just fascinated by it. That's also why I'm studying this and trying to come to what I would say the correct belief too about this stuff too. It's because it's just a big fascination of mine now as well. But if you believe demons are angels, that doesn't impact your salvation, of course. It is these minor disputes. When I say God's grace, I'm saying God's grace will cover. God knows how ignorant and we are. And, we go to heaven, we can finally learn truths we never knew, and he'll say, yep, you're wrong about that, Jimmy. But it's fine. It's fine, Jimmy, because I still love you. You still accepted my son, decided you wanted to be part of my family, be my adopted child. So even though you had these other weird beliefs and just flat out wrong beliefs elsewhere, it's okay. Now you definitely know the truth, but yeah, didn't matter back then. It's the same today. That's one of the great things too about grace. God's grace is, I believe every day it's like, especially as someone who seeks beliefs and truth constantly and knows I fall short of that too. It's like, well, that's why it's so important that I do believe and accept the most important truths of life. Because then those minor things, they don't really matter much in the end. But let me stop. I'm at 36 minutes now, so this video is going to take forever to upload. And I always, I said I was going to go like 15 minutes on this, and I always, ramble much longer. So I'm sorry. If you stuck it out this long, then I don't know. I guess you like listening to my stream of conscience as much as me. I do it because I'm probably prideful and selfish. Like we all are at some point. Anyway, see you in the next video.